Peri-implant disease is one of those perfect storms that's coming upon us, and the prevalence of peri-implant disease is a very complex problem, and I'm happy to say that I think we can actually make a fairly significant impact just by changing perhaps a few of the things that we do every day in our practice. So I hope I'll convince you that that's true. And I first want to acknowledge Milan Jovanovic. And in the morning, he looks like the first picture. In the afternoon, well, he looks like the second picture. But he helps me turn the things I have in my head into the reality I place in my patients' mouths. And that's necessary. And then Vladimir Agranat, he's a PhD in fluid mechanics. And because I was studying the movement of fluid during the intraoral cementation process, I didn't have the words to describe the things I did, and I wanted to make sure the words I was using made sense in the fluid dynamics world. And in fact, we developed a mathematical model to study the movement of fluids. And it was a lot of work, and not much more came of it, but we might get a publication of it over the next year or so. But he made me feel comfortable about the things I'm going to tell you today. Treatment complications have many contributing factors, certainly patient-related and industry-related. And certainly we have to know that technology where it is today, that precision costs money. And a lot of precision costs a lot more money. So if we want to have really well-fitting parts, we have to make sure that the manufacturer is able to produce that with the budget that they have. And in fact, I think that's an important thing that will evolve after we fix the next thing, which is the dentist-related issues that perhaps we're contributing to, because complications are bad for business. I'm going to cover, I'm going to compare, I have to talk about the screw-in technique to convince you why you should be doing some cementation intraorally. And then I'll tell you a few things you can do to make cementation safer. And then I need to review a little bit the concept of retrievability. Because in everybody's mind, retrievability has to do with the screw-in technique of prosthesis installation. Meanwhile, it has nothing to do with the installation technique at all. It has to do with other attributes that I'll talk about. And then I want to see if I can apply my safer installation technique using a cementation phase to the screw-in technique, so people who choose to do that technique will be able to reduce their complications as well. So on with the show. The last 4 significant reviews with thousands of implants show that we have a mucositis rate of approximately 30% and peri-implantitis rate of about 15%. So according to the words of Wilson, that makes peri-implant disease about 45% of implants. And we often have to wonder because there's no difference between cement in and screw in. And those who push for the screw-in technique, they think, like, what's causing their complications? We have to ask ourselves that. Because there's no cement, they can't blame it on cement, so what's causing it? So I hope to answer that today. And then, well, we know subgingival cement. Cement doesn't belong in a subgingival environment, so that's what we'll talk about too. So what should we do? What's safer for the patient? And what I see happening over the last while, we're just spinning. We're just arguing with each other, which is better, this or that. But few people are really delving down deep and seeing what's causing the problem in the first place. So I'm going to go over the screw installation, what the problem is. Why is it that when we get a prosthesis from our laboratory, and we know they're not drinking, and we look at it and it perfect. It fits perfect. It can't be any better. And then we put it into the mouth. And why is it that we have to adjust contacts and occlusion and fit and all these things? Why is it? Well, and why do we have good days and bad days? The dentist can't assess the accuracy of the model, and every single model is inaccurate. That's the problem. Some are just more inaccurate than others. And it doesn't matter. I've been working with digital impressions for a while. You know, you have particle sizes, you have implant analogs that you've got to shove into these printed models and all these sort of things. Both systems have inaccuracies, and I'm not even sure which one's more accurate than the other. I think the digital is actually catching up to the analog in this field yet. In the future, maybe it'll be different. So the big problem with screwed-in prosthetics is you're assembling your prosthesis together with your abutments on an inaccurate model. And that's why it fits on a model, but not in the mouth. That's why you have to do your adjustments. And it's variable, and you can't assess it. So it's a crapshoot. Should our prosthesis installation technique be a crapshoot? See, that's the thing you got to ask. So I made these little diagrams up, and what you see on my right is this part here is the prosthesis, and this is for the screw-in technique. So it's joined to the abutment. It doesn't matter whether you're firing the porcelain onto it or somehow it's put onto analogs. This is the 3-unit bridge. It's joined. Then the dentist, when he receives it, it looks really good on the model, so they take out the abutment prosthesis complex. And now they're taking this thing, and they're taking it, and they want to put it in a mouth. But because it's not accurate, it doesn't go in. And there are a lot of devices we'll talk about that fool us a little bit to thinking it fits, like the multi-unit abutment. But it's not really fitting because we can't make things that parallel. And we are tactile and we're visual. There's a whole world out there that's not within our resolution. And so here we go. When we try to put in, a few things happen. Let's say it's a little bit too big. Let's say there's a tight contact even on this side. Contacts will keep you from seating down too. So you try to get it in. You start tightening it. If these two channels, if the screw channel inside your implant does not line up with your abutment channel, your screw is going to be on a little bit of an angle. So first thing is like a coat hanger. You're starting to weaken your screw. Then you try to get it down. Well, then you've got to bend the top of your top so it grabs the seat here. Then something has to give. Your bone gets compressed. Maybe the top of your implant distorts. Maybe the implant bends. It's all titanium. Titanium's hard to polish because it's soft. Okay? So these are the things that happen. And the worst thing that happens, in my opinion, is you get a macro gap or an implant abutment misfit here and here. And with macro gaps, it's like a void that you leave at this junction. It's at the bone level, so you can't get at it. And size matters. Size matters because pathology results as a result of host resistance, size of the inoculum, and the virility of the bacteria that are in there. So that's a problem, and perhaps that's making a fairly big contribution to the prostheses that are screwed in. Now, Scott Fromm, he's a periodontist. I'm so happy he came out with this paper this year. It was a small paper, but he was talking about the dreaded microgap. I think he wrote this paper for all of us to support me. But he thinks that inaccurate impressions cause these inaccurate models. But in fact, I think every impression is inaccurate Some of them are just a little bit more inaccurate than others. That's right. And you know. And a lot of the experiments are done in vitro. No saliva, tongues, gaggers, nothing. It's all done in vitro when they measure how accurate things are. And he actually brings up the idea that if you have a misfit in the beginning, that trying to take it out and reinstall it isn't going to fix your misfit, because you might have created a distortion at your connection. Or how many patients do you have that had a loose screw and didn't come in for a year? What do you think the top of the abutment and implant has been doing for a whole year? Right? It's not good, I can tell you that. So, and he relates it to peri-implantitis, and he mentions screw fracture, but I already showed you how the screw fracture happens. So then I look at another paper, and it's I found it at for.org. It's a Nobel Pharma funded for.org educational system, and Paulo Malo, you see him jumping right out at you. Well, he came up with a number of risk factors, and he made a grid, an algorithm, to try to help guide us how often we should be seeing our patients to clean their teeth, to see if we could mitigate the mucositis and peri-implantitis we were seeing. And it's very interesting. I ran through it. I don't have a long time to talk about it, but he had a category, implant abutment misfit. And this is what he shows as implant abutment misfit in that small group that had implant abutment misfit. I would like to suggest to you that 100% of his models, 100% of his frameworks were misfit. Because if this is what he's using to talk about a misfit in the middle, I don't think he was looking for misfits. And only, I mean, this is about, this got to be about 400 microns. You know, by the time you get that big, and that's even at the other connection. What about here? A little bit change in angle of your x-ray. You know what? Our technology that we have in our dental offices is not competent to really evaluate for misfits unless they're really huge. Certainly not at the realm of 1 micron that bacteria are. So here's Paulo Malo's risk factor thing. And what I did, I took my Excel sheet and I just plugged in stuff all over the place. And I took only the people with a history of periodontitis. Now, how many people, how many patients do you have that lost all their teeth that didn't have a 5mm or a 6mm pocket? So I would say a great percentage of the population that have lost all their teeth probably have history of periodontitis. Now, here's the lack of prosthesis fit. So if we take just history of periodontitis and put it together with lack of prosthesis fit, we're already in the high risk group. And as a result of that, he's suggesting that we do a 3-month scaling cycle, right? And then as soon as we add in one more thing, like, for example, plaque. How many patients do you have that don't have any plaque? Or bleeding on probing. How many implants did you have that you couldn't drop a probe down there and caught bleeding, right? So everybody's in a very high risk. And what is he suggesting? Every 2 months. Now, if that's true, then I think it's something you should discuss with your patients. I'm going to have to see you every 2 years for the rest of your life, every 2 months for the rest of your life. I think that's an added cost, right? So anyway, this is when it comes to there. And the problem is, we have no way of diagnosing this problem. And guess what? How do you clean an implant abutment misfit? I don't care if you clean this person every day, you're not going to clean the misfit, the macro gap. You can't do it. It's a blind alley. Once you create this problem, you cannot recover. Even if you took the prosthesis out, threw it in the garbage and made another one, if you're going to screw it in again, you're going to screw it up again. You see? And that's, I'm sorry, that's what it is. And so we can't, it's difficult to diagnose, maintain, or treat. It's a blind alley. We've been led down a garden path. Brannemark was thinking about this in 1985 already. Carl Misch was all over it. But he was all over it from the point of view of the biomechanic, the pressure on the bone causing bone resorption. That was his main thing, because that was easier maybe for him to, because he liked to study that bone compression and stress. But it's the bacterial part. You know, the bacteria wiped out a third of Europe. They're the plagues. Like, these little guys, and they destroy a lot of teeth, so I shouldn't have to convince you. And these oral pathogens, they move. They have little tails called flagella, and the spirochetes move like crazy. So if you have a history of having these, and you have a history that they've already destroyed your bone with your natural teeth, well, what makes you think you're not at risk when you have implants? But you still have the bugs. And I thought after I yanked out all the teeth that I would end up with all these guys being gone. But I don't believe that's true anymore, because they're back. And because when they test which bacteria are involved, they're very close to the ones that are involved in periodontitis. When we do multiple units, we make the problem worse. And that's why we have specific screw tightening sequences and all that. Because we want to bend it just right so it looks on our x-ray like it's not bad, if we can get a proper x-ray. And now, this Dirk's paper is really interesting because the Royal College of Ontario sent 9,000 copies of this paper around to all the dentists in Ontario to kind of warn them that the prevalence of peri-implant disease is high and we should maybe discuss it with our patients. And the same group came out that patients with 4 or more implants had 15 times the risk of peri-implantitis. Now, why would that be? And 77% of their sample, and I bet you probably most of their more than 4 sample, because, you know, all on 4 is over there, 77% of the prostheses were installed by the screw-in technique. Now, the same study came out. Now, I got to tell you, the people there were not maintained very well after they had their treatment. They were on an annual basis, in spite of the fact that they had a over 20% smoker group, and they had a over 24% periodontitis on existing teeth group, and they were still seen on an annual basis. So my feeling is one of the reasons their numbers are so high, like a 65% peri-implant disease rate, pretty high, I think, is because they were neglected. It was a neglected group. In Canada, if I would see a person with existing periodontitis on an annual basis, probably I would have to go in front of the Royal College. That is supervised neglect. Over there, it seems to be okay. And anyway, so they wanted us to tell our patients that peri-implant disease is a common occurrence, and we should tell it to our patient before they sign up for treatment, and that our clinical strategies should include some preventative measures. Now, here comes the laugh. So, you know what their primary prevention, what their preventative measure was? To manage peri-implant mucositis. So let's just manage the mucositis and it won't go on to peri-implantitis. I mean, that's not primary prevention, is it? How about we try to prevent the peri-implant mucositis? That's primary prevention. That's what I'm going to hope to show you. And this macro gap or implant abutment misfit problem can be 100% solved by the cement-in technique. And I'll tell you why. Because with the cement-in technique, the abutments are put in individually. And therefore, where we put them does not depend on the accuracy of our impression remodel, because it's machined by the companies who are allowed to machine that connection.